There are 6 starting classes in Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, and whether you want to be a hammer-swinging fire god, a badass dual-wielding gun wizard, or you just can't decide what you want to be, we have you covered. So hit that subscribe button, give us the old thumbs up, and let's get you going on which class is right for you. From the previews and trailers, the Spore Warden looked like just another druid ranger class. But oh boy do things get silly fast in the best possible way. This character is great for beginners and anyone who just wants to have fun.
Unleash hell!
The companion is tanky, which gives you a lot of space to try different playstyles. You'll quickly be casting cyclones and smashing through fields of enemies turned snowmen with your best mushroom friend, who also has a habit of farting things to death. The Spore Warden's class feat is Mushroom Companion, and to be honest, the Spore Warden isn't really sure how to feel about that.
I'm not going to sprout anything if I pet you, am I?
Your mushroom buddy deals poison damage, which is great for melting through armor, and they'll lunge at any enemy you ping. When it comes to action skills, this class has Barrage and Blizzard. Barrage summons an ethereal bow that fires 7 arrows, dealing ability damage on impact. Arrows can be fired multiple times and ricochet off surfaces. They also take on any gun damage buffs you might have already going. Early in the game, the bow isn't that impressive. At range, it fires arrows in a pretty wide spread, and too few arrows tend to hit each target. It's only effective as a finisher, which a whole new class of melee weapons are already good at. It's possible that later in the game, there are certain builds that might be able to turn the bow into something more like the golden gun from Destiny. But the second action skill, Blizzard, is way more effective for most of the game. Blizzard spawns 3 frost cyclones that persist for quite a while, slowing and freezing enemies. The cyclones can even chase flying creatures. As a matter of fact, once you get your cyclones going and level up your mushroom companion, you can set a battle in motion and just kind of sit back. There's so many status effects going on that everything just kind of dies, although sometimes it can be hard to see what's happening, which is very Borderlands. The passive skill tree for Spore Warden is pretty straightforward, mostly increasing the damage and health of your mushroom companion, but there are also 2 skills you should pay attention to. Early on, picking Spore Cloud lets your buddy do their fart attack, and then just a bit later, Medicinal Mushroom lets them revive you when you go down in combat. This is great for solo players. How to build? There's no one right way to do this. This is a very forgiving class. I went for a close range build and chose the twist of fate called Village Idiot, which jacks up strength and increases critical damage, but more importantly seems to amp up stagger effects of melee weapons. Then I dumped extra points in dexterity for higher critical chance, and intelligence to make up for the negative stats that come with Village Idiot. Shoring up these weaknesses meant a neutral spell cooldown rate. In the early game, this made a hard-hitting build that would freeze enemies with cyclones, tank with Mushroom Friend, and then finish with staggering melee blows or critical shotgun hits. This build didn't need a lot of points in Constitution to boost health and shields because enemies often just aggroed on my companion. That being said, critical hits are more associated with the Stabbomancer, so you may want to maximize the Spore Warden in other ways, or build a more ranged class to take advantage of Barrage. How to multiclass? Multiclassing can also go in a wide number of ways, and we just sort of started touching on it in the review build. I went Brr-Zerker to boost frost damage from the Warden's already very effective cyclones, or even lets you become a human cyclone with the Brr-Zerker's action skill. The Spellshot is a gun wizard who can dual-wield magic and turn enemies into skeet. You can also make some big mistakes mid-tree, so this class is for more advanced players who don't mind a stats-focused build. That's because partway through Spellshot, your shields stop recharging on their own, and are reliant on you building damage stacks and firing off spells to get them back. Another big thing to note here is if you play with a controller, this class is physically demanding because you'll be mashing triggers and both bumpers almost every attack. All that being said, a well-built Spellshot is a blast to play.
Bad luck or bad choices. Dead all the same.
The Spellshot's class feat is Spell Weaving, which means casting spells or reloading weapons build stacks of increased spell damage. Understanding how Spell Weaving works becomes pretty vital as you go along. The Spellshot's action skills are used to either place one particularly badass enemy on timeout, or find powerful combinations of magic spells to melt enemies before they can fight back. Unlike other classes, the Ambidextrous action skill allows the Spellshot to equip 2 magic spells at the same time. This can be used for some pretty rapid-fire situations. The Polymorph skill lets you turn one enemy into a skeep, which is some kind of alien sheep thing. You can attack them while they're transfigured, but if you don't, they'll become normal again after some time. If you cast Polymorph on an enemy that's too high level to transform, you'll just cast another one of your equipped spells. The Spellshot passive skills all focus on casting and reloading weapons more quickly while escalating your damage output through spell weaving stacks. If you like to maximize damage through stats and aren't too worried about unlocking flashy new abilities, then this is probably your jam. If you're a newer player or just experimenting, do not select Glass Cannon mid-tree. That boosts spell damage but stops your shields from recharging automatically. Again, make sure you fully understand spell weaving stacks or skip this skill for now, because you will die a lot. When it comes to building a Spellshot, I thought it sounded like fun to fire spells as fast as possible and cover wide areas of the field in elemental damage. You may want to focus on more powerful spells fired less often. For the fastest rate of spellcasting, under Twist of Fate, I went the Failed Monk route to boost intelligence and wisdom, which reduces spell cooldown and increases elemental damage at the cost of critical hits. I then spent most of the first part of the game dumping points into intelligence until I could fire off spells with the smallest possible time in between. The only negative I noticed to this build was my melee attacks seemed to be pretty weak. Multiclassing the Spellshot depends on what you want to accomplish. I tend to like to do things that just feel fun, but many of you will be more focused on maximizing your stats. Consider two ideas, with a ranged offensive focused Glass Cannon build or a more powerful defensive build that lets you get a lot closer. For a ranged offensive Spellshot, combine them with Clawbringer, mostly for the Wyvern companion that can reach out and set things on fire, but also because if you're playing with other people, this class hands out elemental team buffs. As a matter of fact, a Glass Cannon build behind a few friends can be insanely powerful. A great defensive Spellshot can combine their abilities with Spore Warden to get a tanky mushroom buddy. That gives you space to step back and use them sticks at a more casual pace. There's really no right answer. I didn't try this, but if you go Stabbomancer, you can probably vastly improve your critical damage. Our reviewer even suggested going all in on the Glass Cannon build by combining them with the Graveborn, which sounds very risky.
Everything you need to know about the Brr-Zerker comes from the wordplay that makes up its name. It is, at its heart, a riff on the Brr-Zerker, Borderlands version of the heavy tank class, with a twist of frost-focused magic. One of Wonderland's new features is the dedicated melee weapon, and if you're interested in using it often, the Brr-Zerker is the perfect fit for you. Combine that with the enraged mechanic to deal bonus frost damage, and you have a powerful close-range fighter that's all about jumping into the middle of the action. If you like having a large health pool, telling your enemies to chill, and close-range weapons, the Brr-Zerker is for you. The Brr-Zerker's class feat is Rage of the Ancients, which activates Enraged every time you use an action skill. What does Enraged do? It adds bonus frost damage to all of your attacks. The duration of base Enraged lasts 15 seconds. However, it doesn't deplete while an action skill is active. So, if you use Dreadwind, which lasts 6 seconds, Enraged will proc at the start, giving you a total of 21 seconds. You can also increase the duration of Enraged by 35% if you activate an action skill, something you can take advantage of with Feral Surge. Your starting action skill is Dreadwind, where your Fatemaker will spin around for 6 seconds, dealing damage based on the stats of their equipped melee weapon. While in effect, you have increased movement speed and immunity to the slow status effect, so you can keep up as enemies move around and still hit them. You may notice at the start of the game, Dreadwind doesn't seem all that effective. Damage doesn't hit as hard as you'd like, and enemies can still attack you, and getting put into save your soul state ends your Dreadwind. Because Dreadwind is tied to the damage of your equipped melee weapon, this is a skill that only gets better the further into your playthrough. And you want to prioritize passive skills that boost melee and close range damage, as well as scavenging vending machines for better melee weapons. Your second skill is Feral Surge, a single-use lunge attack that will deal area frost damage to enemies. Feral Surge is a great way to get into a group of enemies' faces quickly, apply frost damage to them, and then follow up with a close-range weapon like a shotgun. However, the real fun comes with the fact that you can chain Feral Surge, as its cooldown will reset if you kill an enemy with it. In fact, Feral Surge will instantly kill an enemy if their health is below 20%, which is pretty easy to tell thanks to the game's segmented health bars. If you play this right, you can keep chaining Feral Surge over and over, bypassing its 32-second cooldown. This pairs beautifully with Enraged, which, as previously mentioned, can have its duration prolonged every time you activate a skill. To truly take advantage of Feral Surge requires more thought and planning than Dreadwind, but if that sort of ability chaining excites you, this is a really cool skill. As you might have guessed, the Berserker's passive skills are all about increasing the power of frost and melee damage, boosting stats like Enraged, and improving the health and damage reduction so you can stay up close and personal. So the core of an effective Berserker is strong melee damage, plenty of health to keep you alive, and using your action skills as much as possible. That means allocating points into Strength, Constitution, and Attunement. For your Twist of Fate, Village Idiot is perfect for giving you that raw damage output up front, while keeping everything else you need neutral. Recovering Inventory Hoarder is also a potential option as it gives you an extra skill cooldown boost, but you are going to be sacrificing some max HP, and you'll want to put your extra points into that to even things out. When it comes to multiclassing, if you decide you want to pair Berserker with another class's action skill, pick one that has a skill you can use frequently so you're still activating Enraged all the time. For example, Spore Warden is a great option with Barrage, which can be fired multiple times. Or you could take advantage of Blizzard and use your passive Frost boost to increase the power of the Cyclones further. And as mentioned, the Cyclones last for a really long time, and as long as the skill is active, Enrage's duration counter doesn't go down. The Clawbringer is an elemental powerhouse and perhaps the most well-rounded of the classes. With a fistful of fire in one hand and lightning in the other, Clawbringer can bring a little bit of everything to the table, including their trusty Wyvern companion. There aren't really any tricks to Clawbringer, which might make it a bit dull if you're looking to be a little more weird or active with your class. However, if you rather focus on shooting and letting elemental damage just happen around you with no extra effort on your part, the Clawbringer is a good choice, and can be a great class to pick second and pair with any of the others. The Clawbringer's class feat is Wyvern Companion, a cute little flying companion that will claw out your enemy's eyes and rain hellfire down on them. Any increase to your damage also increases your companion's damage, which makes boosting fire damage very important if you want your Wyvern to be as effective as possible. The Wyvern's pretty good about just doing their own thing, and as a result it can be pretty easy to forget they are even there. If you want a feat that feels more active than passive, you might not like the Wyvern. But if you rather have a buddy that deals bonus damage with no effort on your part, Wyvern is a good choice. Your starting action skill is Cleansing Flames, a massive hammer strike that slams the earth or nearby enemy skulls with large melee damage as well as a fire nova, creating a fire area of effect attack. Even at the start, Cleansing Flame is a powerful skill and can deal some heavy damage, making it really fun and satisfying right out of the gate. The second action skill is Storm Dragon's Judgment, which gives the Fatemaker essentially Thor's hammer. It's a ranged skill that you throw, dealing area of effect lightning damage for 8 seconds wherever it lands. You can also recall it back early, refunding some cooldown, and yes, any enemies in its path back to you do take damage. When it comes to passive skills, the Clawbringer's focus is on its 3 core attributes: fire damage, lightning damage, and their Wyvern companion. Rather than splitting your points into both fire and lightning, you're better off picking one element and focusing on it to maximize its potential. Fire might seem like the better choice because your Wyvern breathes fire, however there are passive skills that can give your Wyvern lightning damage, so really it's about picking the element based on which action skill you prefer. And which action skill you end up picking also is going to affect how you build your character to some degree, which is a bit of a bummer in the early game because you do have to pick your skill first. However, you can respec in Brighthoof if you change your mind later. While not quite as melee heavy as the Berserker is, melee and critical damage still play a key role in the Clawbringer's action skills, and as such, strength is good to invest in. The class can be quite tanky, not with HP, but its ward, thanks to a few passive skills. So Constitution is another place to put points, especially if you use Cleansing Flame, which requires you to get up close and personal. Wisdom is a great option if you want to go all in on the elemental side of them. For Twist of Fate, you can pick Village Idiot if you want to go big on melee and crit damage, or for a slightly more risky option, Rogue Alchemist gives you a large boost to status damage, at the cost of Constitution. This can work out well though if you favor long-range weapons and Storm Dragon's Judgment. When it comes to multiclassing, because of how straightforward Clawbringer is, and because most of its skills don't require extra work to activate, it can make a great second class option. It's always nice to have more elemental damage on your attacks, and pretty much any class can benefit from having a wyvern following you around, setting stuff on fire. I found it to be a solid pair up with the Brr-Zerker, who I played as my main class. I would focus on chaining Feral Surge and Enraged, while my wyvern would just mop up everyone else.
Alright y'all, I'm David and I'm here to talk to you about the Graveborn, or as I like to call him, a demon in a prayer. Now the Graveborn is an interesting class that might not be the most attractive on paper, but damn if it isn't effective. Siphoning away enemy health through dark energy is the bread and butter of the Graveborn, and it's easier said than done. The key though? Go all out. Fully sending your character into the heat of battle, barely keeping the balance between sacrificing your health or regaining it back is the most effective and fun way to play Graveborn. Oh, and you get to do it with a kinda cute, kinda creepy demon friend along the way. Sweet, right? So in my mind, the Graveborn is an excellent class for risk takers. Players who don't really want a class that's fully reliant on the at-range spellcasting cooldowns like the Spellshot, but they're not interested in a melee brawl like the Brr-Zerker either. So you'd think that the Graveborn is kind of this like perfect middle ground for an average player that wants the best of both worlds, right? But the reality is, it's probably better suited for veterans who aren't worried about a whittling health bar and can reliably break themselves out of a death save or two in the heat of the battle if they go down. So let's break down the Graveborn's abilities, starting with the class feat, the Demi-Lich Companion. This floating companion will follow you around and hit enemies at range with dark magic, which is a new element in the game by the way that leeches enemies' health and gives it back to you. Whenever you cast a spell, your Demi-Lich will cast a Hellish Blast, which chases down enemies and hits them with an area attack using the same element that you just used. Early on, the Demi-Lich is mostly just good for cracking occasional jokes, but eventually you can stack certain upgrades to improve its efficacy. Some skills will even grant you more companions with specific perks, increasing your own damage output based on how many companions you've got with you at any given time. Kinda messed up, but you can even use your Demi-Lich as bait, where damage that would normally go to you becomes redirected to your companion's health bar instead. Every class has two main action skills. In the Graveborn, we start out with Dire Sacrifice. If you find the Graveborn to be kind of bare and dry so far with its abilities, Dire Sacrifice is the one action skill that looks pretty rad. The way that it works is you sacrifice some health to deal dark magic damage, but you also steal health from all enemies nearby. The more health that you sacrifice, the more bonus damage. The skill is perfect for when you are surrounded by lots of small enemies, or you have a large boss down to a sliver of health and want to go in for the kill. Conversely, if you want a strong opening attack, you can use it as a primer and then combine certain spells or even leeching weapons to quickly regain any health that you had lost. The second action skill is Reaper of Bones. Reaper of Bones is basically a game of extending the activation timer for as long as you can. When this action skill is cast, you get an increasing bonus to dark magic damage, which can heal you and extend the duration of this attack as long as you keep getting kills. The catch is, you are constantly losing health with seemingly no end. When you run out of health, you become invulnerable for a couple of seconds, and then you come back with a small amount of health. If the timer runs out and enemies are still alive by the time you run out of health, then GG my friend, because you are most likely going down. Combining this with health stealing magic and guns is a must in case you deal with enemies that were unexpectedly tankier than your usual skeleton archer. The Graveborn's also got a nice set of passive skills, so the passive skill tree mostly focuses on leeching more health and outputting more damage to keep you alive in those full send moments. There are some fun things that you can unlock later down the tree, such as one particular skill that has a chance to summon a Dark Hydra, but the majority of your upgrade points will be invested into maximizing your dark magic life stealing, reducing your cooldowns, or increasing the damage output of your companions. So you decided to go Graveborn? Perfect, great choice. Now let's talk about the Graveborn builds. When you choose your class, you can pick an origin story that gives you certain buffs and debuffs to particular attributes. Graveborn players should go with the Failed Monk origin story, which depletes your starting strength and dexterity, but dramatically improves upon intelligence and wisdom. In terms of upgrade paths, a specific skill that you should look into early on is the Faithful Thralls perk, which buffs your damage based on how many active companions you have fighting on your behalf. Most of the skills are under the hood improvements that can activate on kills or are passively active in the background. Graveborn's usefulness overall though is heightened by your companions, so prioritizing those that spawn more companions on your side are a must. You'll also want to consider which action skill that you prefer. Do you gamble on the Reaper of Bones? If so, definitely put on a health leeching loadout. I cannot stress this enough. This means focusing on weapons, spells, and any gear that gives you more efficient health regeneration. This can apply to Dire Sacrifice as well, although there's more room to venture out and experiment with different elemental weapons. But I would not recommend completely abandoning health leeching weapons or gear from your arsenal. Later on in the story, you will have the option to create multi-classes. That means combining two different classes together to create this like awesome Frankenstein fusion of the two. So you might be wondering, what second class would pair well with Graveborn? Well, combining Graveborn with Spore Warden creates the Horticulturalist multiclass, and the two, in my opinion, work together beautifully. After all, the more companions that Graveborn has, the better, because they're constantly causing chaos, distracting enemies, and ideally leeching health back to you. This makes Spore Warden an excellent choice since it comes with a little mushroom companion right off the bat. If I found that the action skills of Reaper of Bones or Dire Sacrifice were too risky, especially in more difficult situations, swapping to Spore Warden's barrage attack of bows was a nice change of pace. But primarily, it's the mushroom buddy that does the heavy lifting. You might be tempted to try Stabbomancer as a secondary class to combine with the Graveborn, which is fine, but it's important to consider the main stats that go into each class. Remember that failed monk origin story? Stabbomancer tends to benefit from greater dexterity and even strength, which are not the main focus of Graveborn. Graveborn players are better off leveling up Constitution, Wisdom, and even Intelligence for faster spellcasting cooldowns, which may combine nicely with Spellshot if you decide that Spore Warden isn't your forte. Alright, moving on to the Stabbomancer. The Stabbomancer is the first class that appears when you see the class menu, and that is no coincidence. It is the de facto solo or starter class, and great for beginners or people who haven't played Borderlands in a long time. Built to deal frequent bonus damage, playing as a Stabbomancer can almost feel like taking a co-op partner with you. Early skill unlocks focus on melee attacks, movement speed buffs, and amplified critical hit damage. Collectively, that gives the Wonderlands Stabbomancer a swift and deadly skill set that makes dungeon crawling on your lonesome more manageable than with other classes. The Stabbomancer's class feat is Dirty Fighting, which gives the class a higher critical hit chance than the rest. That's something that can quickly be improved upon thanks to some crit buffs available at the base of the skill tree. Like other classes, the Stabbomancer's two starting action skills are built with different situations in mind. Using Ghost Blade, the Stabbomancer will unleash a massive spinning blade made of magic, I guess? That does several seconds of area of effect damage at a rate determined by their equipped melee weapon. If you'd rather get sneaky than stabby, you should consider the Stabbomancer's other action skill, From the Shadows. With this, the Stabbomancer will go invisible for a few seconds, during which time all damage you deal counts as a critical hit, though a less powerful crit than you'd have when not in stealth. Still, the bonus damage plus invisibility can be the deciding factor in vanquishing a fierce pack of foes or toppling a tricky boss. You could even just use it to escape a dicey situation and get your Fatemaker out of harm's way. The Stabbomancer's passive skills largely focus on buffing critical hit damage, critical hit chances, and the severity and longevity of status effects. When selecting your origin story, which is called the Twist of Fate, the game's starter builds, consider whether you want to make your strengths even stronger or patch up weaknesses. If you're playing solo, you should design a character background that doesn't hurt your constitution. However, the best preset in this case is the Failed Monk, which is built mainly for magic casters. Although keep in mind the Failed Monk does give a slight debuff to your dexterity, so consider that. With this in mind, the route that I went was to select Raised by Elves, which gives me above average dexterity in this case and thus even more crit damage at the cost of my constitution, but then patched up that blemish by pouring my 10 freestanding extra points back into constitution and strength to even it out. In the end, this made my already impressive critical hits that much stronger without sacrificing my own health pool as a solo player. When selecting my multiclass for Wonderlands, I was a few hours into the game and feeling like my gameplay wasn't distinctive enough from just another Borderlands. I was promised fantasy, but the weapons tended to feel like Borderlands guns in a witch's hat, so to speak. so I went with something that would give me a new perspective on the game's combat, Spellshot. While my build wasn't yet suited for becoming a part-time conjurer, I started pouring hero points into intelligence, which increased my spell cooldowns, giving me more chances to fling magic around the battlefield. For me, this made a world of difference. No longer was I just swapping among a sea of guns that didn't really feel at home in a fantasy game. Suddenly, with multiclassing, I was firing critical hits from one hand and, well, literal fire from the other. If you're a tried and true Borderlands fan looking to mix it up in this spin-off, adding some magic to your repertoire makes for a well-rounded, but still quite literally sharp, Fatemaker.
And that should get you started. Remember, these are just some of our suggestions from our review build of the game. You'll probably have your own favorites, so let us know what insane builds you intend to make, and what mistakes you made along the way. Make sure to check out our full review of Tiny Tina's Wonderlands over on GameStop's YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.
You may be pungent, but there's no one I'd rather have at my side.